I arrived at the Mammoth Hot Springs Ranger Station on a Thursday in late November, 3 days before my training rotation began. The supervisor who hired me over the phone, Morris, had said to come early, get acclimated to the altitude, and pick up my gear before the first snowfall closed the pass. I needed this job. My student loans had gone to collections in August, and the winter training stipend was double the normal rate because nobody wanted to spend 4 months in the park when the tourists left and the temperature dropped below zero. The station was a long, narrow building with white trim and a green roof, set back from the main road by about 40 yards. Morris met me in the parking lot. He was somewhere past 50 with a gray beard trimmed close and eyes that looked tired in a permanent way. "You made good time," he said. "Left Bozeman at 5 this morning." He nodded and handed me a ring with 12 keys, each one labeled with faded masking tape. "Your quarters are in the West Wing, room 4. Radio's on your desk, channel 6 only. Don't use any other channel unless I tell you otherwise. Cafeteria's closed for the season, so you're on your own for meals. There's a grocery run every Tuesday and Friday if the roads are clear." "Understood." "You'll shadow me for the first week. After that, you'll take the overnight shifts while I supervise the day crew. We've got 2 other winter rangers coming in next month, but until then it's just you and me." He walked me inside. The hallways smelled like old wood and industrial cleaner. My room was small: a bed, a desk, a chair, a window facing north toward the terraces. The radiator clanked when Morris turned it on. "Dinner's at 6 if you want company," he said. "Otherwise, get settled. We start tomorrow at 7. I unpacked slowly. 2 duffel bags, a sleeping bag rated for 30 below, a box of books I probably wouldn't read. I tested the radiator, checked the window latch, and found the bathroom down the hall. Everything worked. Everything was clean. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I stood at the window and watched the terraces. The thermal features were still active in winter steam rising in thick columns. The travertine shelves glowing white and orange in the late afternoon light. A bull elk stood near the lower pools, motionless except for the vapor from his breath. He stayed there for 10 minutes and then he walked away, moving uphill toward the Douglas firs at the edge of the plateau. I ate dinner alone in my room, canned soup and crackers. At 8, I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, measured, stopping outside my door for a moment before continuing toward the stairwell. I opened the door and looked out, but the hallway was empty. I locked the door and went to bed. Morris woke me at 6:30 by knocking twice. "Coffee's in the break room," he said through the door. "Meet me in the equipment bay in 15. The equipment bay was a large garage attached to the east side of the station. It smelled like gasoline and rust. Morris had a clipboard and a pen, and he walked me through the inventory without much ceremony. 2 snowmobiles, both fueled, spare gas in the red cans, 3 gallons each. Flares in the metal locker, 12 per box. We've got 4 boxes. First aid kits in the cabinet by the door. Check it weekly. Replace anything you use. Radio batteries here, charged and dated. Salt in the blue bins, 50-pound bags. We go through about 1 a week. Chalk's on the shelf above." "Chalk? You'll see." He handed me the clipboard. "Every morning at 7, you inventory this list. Write the date, the count, and your initials. If anything's missing or damaged, you radio me immediately. Don't wait until the end of your shift. Immediately, understood?" "Yes." "Good, now suit up. We're doing a perimeter walk." I put on my parka, gloves, and boots. Morris gave me a radio and showed me how to clip it to my belt. Channel 6. He tested it twice, and then we stepped outside. The air was cold enough to hurt. The sky was overcast, low and gray, and the wind came from the north in steady gusts. Morris led me along a gravel path that circled the station, staying about 15 yards from the building at all times. He pointed out the boundary markers, small wooden posts painted white, spaced at regular intervals. "We walk this route twice a day," he said. Once at 7 in the morning, once at 8 at night. You stay inside the markers. You don't cross them for any reason unless I'm with you or I've given you explicit permission over the radio. If you see something outside the markers, you note it, you report it, and you let it be. What kind of something? Wildlife, thermal features that weren't there yesterday, equipment that's been moved, people. People. Off-season, we get trespassers, photographers mostly. Sometimes homeless folks looking for a warm place. You see anyone outside the markers, you radio me. You don't approach, you don't engage. Understood? Understood. We finished the walk in silence. When we got back to the equipment bay, Morris checked his watch. 18 minutes, you should be able to do it in 15 once you're used to the altitude. He led me back inside, down a hallway I hadn't seen before. It ended at a heavy steel door with a keyhole and a deadbolt. Morris used 2 of the keys from my ring to unlock it. "This is the archive room," he said. "Records, maps, incident reports. It stays locked unless you're inside it. When you leave, you lock it behind you. You don't prop the door, you don't loan the keys, and you don't come in here between 2 and 4 in the morning. Why not? Because those are the rules." He pushed the door open. The room was small and windowless, lined with metal filing cabinets and shelves stacked with binders. A single desk sat in the corner with a reading lamp. Morris pulled a binder from the top shelf and set it on the desk. "This is the operations manual for winter. Staff, you'll read it tonight cover to cover. Tomorrow we'll go through it together and I'll answer questions. After that, you're expected to know it by heart." He opened the binder. The first page was a typed list, single-spaced, with a heading that read, "Core Operational Guidelines for Winter Rangers." Morris tapped the page with his finger. "These aren't suggestions. They're rules. You follow them exactly every time, no exceptions. If you can't do that, you tell me now and we'll arrange for you to leave before the roads close." I looked at the list. There were 14 items numbered sequentially. The language was precise and clinical, like safety instructions on a piece of machinery. "I can do it," I said. Morris closed the binder and handed it to me. "Good. Take this to your room. Read it twice. Memorize the first 7 tonight. We'll go over the rest tomorrow." He walked me back to the hallway and locked the archive room behind us. "One more thing," he said. "The station has 3 bathrooms. You use the one on the 2nd floor, room 203. You don't use the one in the basement, and you don't use the one at the end of the west wing. I don't care if the 2nd floor bathroom's occupied or out of order. You wait, or you go outside. Clear?" "Clear." "All right. You're free until 8 tonight. We'll do the evening perimeter walk together, and then you're off until tomorrow morning." He left me in the hallway. I went back to my room, sat at the desk, and opened the binder. The list was printed on thick paper, slightly yellowed. The text was clean and even, but the typewriter had struck some letters harder than others, giving the page an uneven texture. I read it slowly. Core Operational Guidelines for Winter Rangers. 1. Perimeter walks will be conducted at 7 in the morning and 8 at night, every day, regardless of weather. The walk will follow the marked path at a distance of 15 yards from the main building. Do not cross the boundary markers. Do not deviate from the path. Complete the walk in 15 minutes or less. 2. Inventory the equipment bay every morning at 7, immediately following the perimeter walk. Record all counts, dates, and discrepancies. If any item is missing or damaged, radio the supervisor immediately on Channel 6. 3. Between the hours of 2 and 4 in the morning, do not enter the archive room, the basement bathroom, or the west wing bathroom. Use the 2nd floor bathroom in room 203 only. 4. If you hear knocking on your door between 2 and 4 in the morning, do not answer. Do not open the door. Remain in your room until the knocking stops. 5. If you see a person outside the boundary markers after dark, do not approach them. Do not call out to them. Radio the supervisor and wait for instructions. 6. If you see an elk, bison, or other large animal standing motionless near a thermal feature for more than 10 minutes, note the time and location. Do not approach. Report it during the next scheduled radio check. 7. Radio checks will occur at 9 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon, and 11 at night. Use channel 6 only. State your name, your location, and the phrase "all clear" if there are no issues to report. Wait for confirmation before ending the transmission. 8. If the lights in the equipment bay turn off between 8 at night and 6 in the morning, do not turn them back on. Use your flashlight to navigate. Leave the bay immediately and lock the door behind you. 9. If you find salt scattered outside your door in the morning, sweep it up and dispose of it in the outdoor trash receptacle behind the station. Do not bring it inside. Do not ask who put it there. 10. If you hear footsteps in the hallway at night and you did not hear a door open or close, remain in your room. Do not investigate. Wait 5 minutes after the footsteps stop before leaving your room for any reason. 11. During your shift, if you see a ranger in uniform that you do not recognize, greet them politely but do not engage in conversation. Note their appearance and report it during the next radio check. Do not follow them. 12. If you are outside after dark and you hear your name called, do not respond. Return to the station immediately using the shortest route. Do not look toward the source of the voice. 13. The West Wing hallway has 14 doors. If you count a different number, return to your room immediately and radio the supervisor. Do not walk the hallway again until instructed. 14. If you see Morris outside the station between midnight and 5 in the morning, do not acknowledge him. Do not radio him. Wait until morning and ask him in person if he was outside during the night. If he says no, do not discuss it further. I read the list twice, then a third time. Some of the rules made sense in a vague, bureaucratic way: perimeter walks, inventory checks, radio protocols. Others felt arbitrary, superstitious, like someone had strung together a series of coincidences and called it policy. I wanted to dismiss it. I wanted to think Morris was testing me or that this was some kind of hazing ritual for new hires. But the tone of the writing was too flat, too procedural. These weren't pranks. They were instructions written by someone who expected them to be followed without question. I closed the binder and looked out the window. The sun was setting behind the mountains and the terraces were glowing in the last of the light. Steam rose in slow, heavy columns, drifting east with the wind. I watched until the sky turned dark, and then I turned on the desk lamp and read the list again. At 8, Morris knocked on my door. "Perimeter walk," he said. I grabbed my parka and followed him outside. The temperature had dropped another 10 degrees and the wind had picked up. Morris walked the path without a flashlight, his boots crunching on the gravel. I followed close behind, keeping my eyes on the boundary. Markers. They were harder to see in the dark. Just faint white shapes against the snow. We passed the equipment bay, the south corner of the station, the terraces. Everything was silent except for the wind and the hiss of the thermal features. Morris didn't speak. He didn't look around. He walked the path like he'd done it 1,000 times, and when we reached the starting point, he checked his watch. 14 minutes, he said. Good. We went inside. Morris stopped at the stairwell and looked at me. You read the list? Yes. Questions. I hesitated. Why 2 to 4 in the morning? Because that's when the rules apply. But why those hours specifically? Morris studied me for a moment. You ever work a night shift before? Not like this. Then you'll learn. The park's different in winter, fewer people, more space, less light. Things happen at night that don't make sense during the day. The rules exist because someone before you, someone before me, figured out what works and what doesn't. You follow them, you'll be fine. You ignore them, you won't. Has anyone ignored them? Yes. What happened? They're not here anymore. He turned and walked up the stairs. I heard his door close a moment later, and then the building was quiet. I went back to my room and locked the door. The radiator clanked softly and the wind rattled the window frame. I sat at the desk and opened the binder again, reading until I could recite the first 7 rules without looking at the page. At 11, the radio on my desk crackled to life. Morris's voice, flat and clear. "Evening check, confirm your status." I picked up the radio and pressed the button. "This is Harper, room 4, all clear." "Confirmed. Next check at 9 tomorrow morning." The radio went silent. I turned off the desk lamp and lay down on the bed, still dressed. I didn't think I'd be able to sleep, but exhaustion pulled me under within minutes. I woke at 2:17 in the morning to the sound of knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on my door. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. The room was dark except for the faint glow of the clock on the desk. The knocking came again, 3 knocks, evenly spaced, patient. I remembered Rule 4. Do not answer. Do not open the door. I stayed in bed and listened. The knocking stopped. I counted to 60, then to 100. The hallway was silent. I got up slowly and moved to the door. I pressed my ear against it and held my breath. Nothing. No footsteps, no voices, no sound of a door opening or closing. I looked down at the gap between the door and the floor. No shadows, no movement. I stepped back and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands were shaking. I checked the clock again. 2:23. I had to wait until 4. The next 2 hours passed in complete silence. I didn't hear the knocking again. I didn't hear footsteps. At 4:15, I unlocked the door and looked out into the hallway. It was empty. The overhead lights were on, casting long shadows from the doorways. I counted the doors. 14. I went to the bathroom, washed my face, and returned to my room. I didn't sleep again. At 6:30, Morris knocked on my door. "Coffee's ready," he said. I met him in the break room. He poured 2 cups and handed me one without a word. We drank in silence, and then he led me to the equipment bay for the morning inventory. Everything was in order: 2 snowmobiles, 3 gallons of gas per can, 12 flares per box, 4 boxes total. I recorded the counts on the clipboard and initialed the page. Morris checked my work and nodded. "Good. Now the perimeter walk." We walked the path in 13 minutes. The sky was clear and the air was cold enough to make my lungs ache. Morris didn't speak until we were back inside. "Anything unusual last night?" he asked. I hesitated. "Someone knocked on my door around 2:20. Morris looked at me. "Did you answer?" "No." "Good. Did you open the door?" "No." "Did you hear anything else? Footsteps, voices, doors?" "No." He nodded slowly. "That's normal. It'll happen most nights, sometimes more than once. You follow the rule, you'll be fine." "Who is it? Does it matter?" "I'd like to know." Morris set down his coffee cup. "There's no good answer to that question. If I tell you it's the wind or the building settling, you won't believe me. If I tell you it's something else, you'll spend every night trying to figure out what it is, and that'll make you sloppy. The rule works because you follow it, not because you understand it. Trust the process." He picked up his cup and drank. "We'll go through the rest of the list today. After that, you're on your own for the overnight shifts. I'll be in the building, but I won't be checking on you. You have a problem, you radio me. Otherwise, you follow the rules and you do your job. Clear?" "Clear." We spent the rest of the morning in the archive room. Morris walked me through rules 8 through 14, explaining the procedures in the same flat, clinical tone he'd used for the first 7. He didn't elaborate. He didn't offer theories or context. He just repeated the rules until I could recite them back to him without error. At 3 in the afternoon, I did my first solo radio check. "This is Harper, equipment bay, all clear," Morris confirmed. The radio went silent. At 8, I walked the perimeter path alone for the first time. The wind had died down and the stars were out. I stayed inside the markers, counted my steps, and finished in 14 minutes. When I got back to the equipment bay, I locked the door and checked the lights. They were on. I left them that way. At 11, I did my final radio check from my room. Morris confirmed, and then the station went quiet. I sat at my desk and waited for the knocking. It came at 2:12, 3 knocks, slow and deliberate. I stayed in bed and counted the seconds. The knocking stopped after the 3rd knock. I waited 5 minutes, then 10. The hallway remained silent. At 4, I unlocked my door and checked the hallway. Empty. 14 doors. I went back to bed and stared at the ceiling until morning. The pattern repeated for 6 days. Perimeter walks, inventory checks, radio calls, knocking at 2 in the morning, always 3 knocks, always stopping after the 3rd. Morris asked me about it once on the 3rd day, and I told him I'd followed the rule. He nodded and moved on. On the 7th night, something changed. I was at my desk reading through the operations manual again when the knocking started. 3 slow knocks just like before. I stayed seated and waited for it to stop. It didn't stop. After the 3rd knock, there was a pause, and then 3 more knocks, and then 3 more. I looked at the clock. 2:14. The knocking continued, rhythmic and patient, repeating every 15 seconds. I sat frozen at my desk, my hand hovering over the radio. Morris had said not to answer, not to open the door. He hadn't said what to do if the knocking didn't stop. I waited. The knocking went on for 8 minutes, and then it stopped abruptly mid-sequence. The hallway went silent. I stayed at my desk until 4, and then I checked the hallway. Empty. 14 doors. I went back to my room and tried to sleep. At 7, Morris met me in the equipment bay. I told him about the knocking. "How long?" he asked. 8 minutes. Maybe a little more. He frowned. "Did you open the door?" "No." "Did you radio me?" "No. You said not to answer, not to open the door. You didn't say to radio you." Morris nodded slowly. "Good. You followed the rule. That's the important part." He paused, then pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "But we're going to add a clarification, just to be safe." He unfolded the paper and handed it to me. It was a typed list, shorter than the first one, with a heading that read, "Amendments to Core Guidelines." "These are updates," Morris said. "Things we've learned over the years. You'll read these today and add them to your manual. From now on, both lists apply." I looked at the paper. There were 7 items numbered sequentially starting from 15. 15. If the knocking on your door lasts longer than 5 minutes, remain in your room but move away from the door. Sit or lie on the bed and do not look toward the hallway. Wait until the knocking stops before resuming normal activity. 16. If you see salt scattered outside your door in the morning and the amount is greater than 1 cup, do not sweep it up immediately. Radio the supervisor first and wait for instructions. 17. If you hear footsteps in the hallway that stop directly outside your door and do not continue, wait 10 minutes before leaving your room. If the footsteps resume, wait an additional 10 minutes. 18. If you are outside after dark and you hear your name called more than once, do not return to the station immediately. Instead, walk to the equipment bay, wait 5 minutes, and then return to the station using the south entrance only. 19. If the lights in the equipment bay turn off between 8 at night and 6 in the morning and you are inside the bay when it happens, do not leave immediately. Wait 30 seconds, then leave using your flashlight. Lock the door behind you and do not return until morning. 20. If you count more than 14 doors in the West Wing hallway, return to your room and lock the door. Radio the supervisor immediately. Do not leave your room until the supervisor confirms it is safe to do so. 21. If you see Morris outside the station between midnight and 5 in the morning and he waves or gestures for you to approach, do not acknowledge him. Return to the station immediately and radio the supervisor from your room. Do not leave your room until morning. I read the list twice, then looked at Morris. These have all happened? Yes. To you? To me, to the rangers before me, to the seasonal staff. We add amendments when we learn something new. The core rules cover most situations, but the park finds gaps. The park? Morris took the paper back and refolded it. You'll understand eventually. For now, just follow the rules. Both lists, no exceptions. I spent the rest of the day copying the amendments into my binder and memorizing them. Morris supervised the day crew, 2 maintenance workers who drove in from Gardner every morning and left by 4 in the afternoon, while I handled the inventory and the perimeter walks. At 8, I walked the path alone. At 11, I radioed Morris from my room. This is Harper, room 4, all clear. Confirmed. Next check at 9 tomorrow morning. I sat at my desk and waited. The knocking started at 2:23. 3 knocks, a pause, then silence. I moved to the bed and lay down, facing away from the door. The knocking didn't resume. At 4, I checked the hallway. Empty. 14 doors. The amendments became routine. I counted doors every night before bed. I checked for salt every morning. I memorized the timing windows and the procedural responses. Morris quizzed me once a day, picking random rules and asking me to recite them verbatim. I never missed one. On the 11th night, I was in the equipment bay at 9:30 checking the fuel levels on the snowmobiles. The lights went out. I stood in the dark, my hand still on the gas cap. The bay was silent except for the hiss of the wind outside. I remembered Rule 8. Do not turn them back on. Use your flashlight. Leave immediately. I pulled my flashlight from my belt and clicked it on. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating the snowmobiles, the shelves, the door. I walked quickly to the exit, locked the door behind me, and went back to the station. Morris was in the break room drinking coffee. I told him what happened. Did you leave immediately? He asked. Yes. Did you turn the lights back on? No. Good. Check them again in the morning. If they're still off, radio me before you. Enter. The next morning, the lights were on. I did the inventory and everything was in order. Morris didn't mention it again. The days blurred together, perimeter walks, inventory checks, radio calls. The knocking came most nights, sometimes short, sometimes long. I followed the rules. I stayed in my room. I waited. On the 18th night, I saw someone outside. It was just after 9. I was finishing the perimeter walk halfway along the north side of the station when I saw a figure standing near the terraces. They were about 50 yards away, just outside the boundary markers facing the thermal features. They were wearing a dark jacket and a hat, and they stood motionless, hands in their pockets. I stopped walking and watched. The figure didn't move. I checked my watch, 9:06. I waited for 2 minutes and the figure remained in place. I remembered Rule 5, do not approach, do not call out. Radio the supervisor. I pulled the radio from my belt and pressed the button. This is Harper, North Perimeter. I have a visual on a person outside the boundary markers, approximately 50 yards from the station near the terraces. They are stationary, awaiting instructions. Morris responded immediately. Describe their appearance. Dark jacket, hat facing away from the station, medium build, no visible gear or equipment. Do not approach, continue your perimeter walk. When you return to the station, lock the door and wait in the break room. I'll handle it. Understood. I clipped the radio to my belt and kept walking. I didn't look back at the figure. I finished the walk in 12 minutes, locked the door behind me, and went to the break room. Morris was already there, putting on his parka. Stay inside, he said. I'll be back in 20 minutes. He left through the south entrance. I poured a cup of coffee and sat at the table watching the clock. 22 minutes later, Morris returned. His face was red from the cold and he looked tired. "Did you see them?" I asked. "No. Nobody out there now." "Could they have left?" "Maybe. Or maybe they were never there." He pulled off his gloves and set them on the table. "You did the right thing. You radioed me, you kept your distance, you followed the rule, that's what matters." "But if they were never there?" "Then it doesn't matter," Morris said, cutting me off. "The rule still applies. You see someone outside the markers after dark, you treat them as real until proven otherwise. You don't take chances." He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down across from me. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine." "Sleeping?" "Enough." Morris studied me for a moment. "You're doing good work, better than most of the rangers we get in winter. But I need you sharp. If you start losing sleep, if you start second-guessing the rules, you tell me. Understood?" "Understood." He drained his coffee and stood up. "I'm going to bed. You've got the overnight. Next check at 11. I stayed in the break room until 10, and then I went to my room. At 11, I radioed Morris. "This is Harper, room 4, all clear." "Confirmed." I sat at my desk and opened the binder. I read through the core rules and the amendments, checking for gaps, for anything I might have missed. Everything was clear. Everything made sense in the context of the procedures. The knocking started at 2:38. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more. I moved to the bed and lay down facing the window. The knocking continued for 6 minutes and then it stopped. At 4, I checked the hallway. Empty. 14 doors. The next morning, I found salt outside my door. It was scattered in a rough line across the threshold, maybe half a cup. I remembered Rule 9, sweep it up, dispose of it outside, do not bring it inside. I went to the equipment bay, got a broom and dustpan and swept up the salt. I carried it outside to the trash receptacle behind the station and dumped it in. Then I returned the broom and dustpan to the bay and did the morning inventory. Morris was waiting for me in the break room. "You find anything unusual this morning?" "Salt outside my door." "How much?" "About half a cup. I swept it up and disposed of it." Morris nodded. "Good, that's normal. It'll happen every few days. Just follow the rule. Who's putting it there? Does it matter?" "I'd like to know." Morris poured himself a cup of coffee. "There are a lot of things in this park that don't have easy explanations. The salt's one of them. You can spend your time trying to figure it out, or you can follow the rules and do your job. I recommend the latter." He left the break room and I didn't ask again. The pattern continued. Perimeter walks, inventory checks, radio calls. Knocking at night, salt in the morning. I followed the rules. I stayed sharp. I didn't ask questions. On the 23rd night, I heard footsteps in the hallway. It was just after midnight. I was at my desk writing in my log when I heard them slow, deliberate footsteps, moving from the stairwell toward my end of the hallway. They stopped outside my door. I set down my pen and listened. The footsteps didn't continue. I checked my watch. 12:04. I remembered Rule 10. Wait 5 minutes after the footsteps stop before leaving your room. But Rule 17 added a clarification. If the footsteps stop directly outside your door, wait 10 minutes. If they resume, wait an additional 10 minutes. I waited. The footsteps didn't resume. At 12:14, I got up and moved to the door. I pressed my ear against it and held my breath. Silence. At 12:19, I unlocked the door and opened it slowly. The hallway was empty. The overhead lights were on. I counted the doors. 14. I stepped out into the hallway and looked both ways. No one. Nothing. I walked to the stairwell and checked the landing. Empty. I went back to my room and locked the door. I logged the incident footsteps at 12:04, stopped outside my door, no visual contact, and then I sat at my desk and waited. The knocking started at 2:41. 3 knocks, evenly spaced. I moved to the bed and waited for it to stop. It stopped after the 3rd knock. At 4, I checked the hallway again. Empty. 14 doors. In the morning, there was no salt. Morris asked me about the footsteps during the inventory check. I told him what happened, and he nodded. "Did you follow the rules?" he asked. "Yes." "Did you see anyone?" "No." "Good. That's normal. It'll happen more often now that we're into December. The park's quieter, less daylight, more space for things to move around. You just keep following the rules." "What things?" Morris set down the clipboard. "Harper, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully. The rules exist because they work. Not because we understand why they work, not because they make sense, but because they keep you safe. You start asking what and why, you start looking for explanations, you'll make mistakes. And mistakes out here in winter, they cost. Cost what? Everything." He picked up the clipboard and handed it to me. "Finish the inventory. I'll meet you for the perimeter walk in 5 minutes." We walked the path in silence. The sky was overcast and the wind was picking up. Snow was forecast for that night, the first real storm of the season. Morris told me to double-check the fuel and the flares and to make sure the radio batteries were charged. At 8, I walked the perimeter alone. The snow started falling halfway through, thick and heavy, cutting visibility down to 20 yards. I stayed on the path, kept my eyes on the boundary markers, and finished in 16 minutes. At 11, I radioed Morris. "This is Harper, room 4, all clear. Snow's coming down hard." "Confirmed. Stay inside unless there's an emergency. We'll skip the morning perimeter walk if the snow's too deep. Next check at 9 tomorrow morning." The radio went silent. I sat at my desk and listened to the wind. The station creaked and groaned and the snow piled up against the window. I checked the radiator. It was working, warm to the touch, and then I lay down on the bed and tried to sleep. The knocking woke me at 2:53. 3 knocks, slow and deliberate. I stayed in bed and counted the seconds. The knocking stopped after the 3rd knock. I waited for it to resume. It didn't. At 4, I checked the hallway. Empty. 14 doors. In the morning, the snow had stopped. There was about 8 inches on the ground, maybe more near the drifts. Morris radioed me at 7. "Check the equipment bay first, then we'll assess the perimeter." I did the inventory. Everything was in order. Morris met me in the break room and we went outside together. The snow was deep enough that we had to break trail, but the path was still visible. We walked it in 22 minutes. "We'll keep up the perimeter walks," Morris said. "Twice a day, every day, regardless of snow depth. If it gets deeper than 2 feet, we'll use snowshoes. But we don't skip it. Understood?" "Understood." The snow kept falling on and off for the next 3 days. By the 4th day, there was nearly 18 inches on the ground. Morris issued me snowshoes, and I practiced walking the perimeter in them. It took me 28 minutes the first time, 23 the second. Morris said it was good enough. On the 30th night, I saw Morris outside. It was 1:47 in the morning. I couldn't sleep, so I was standing at the window, looking out at the terraces. The moon was up, and the snow was glowing blue-white in the light. I saw a figure walking along the boundary markers, moving slowly from the south retry continue side of the station toward the equipment bay. They were wearing a parka and boots, and they walked with the same measured pace Morris used during the perimeter walks. I checked my watch again. 1:51. I remembered Rule 14. If you see Morris outside the station between midnight and 5 in the morning, do not acknowledge him. Wait until morning and ask him in person if he was outside during the night. I stepped back from the window and sat on the bed. I didn't watch the figure. I didn't try to confirm it was Morris. I just sat there counting the minutes until the knocking started at 2:36. 3 knocks, a pause, then silence. I lay down and faced the wall. The knocking didn't resume. At 4, I checked the hallway. Empty. 14 doors. At 7, I met Morris in the equipment bay. He looked tired, but he always looked tired. I did the inventory while he checked the snowmobiles. When I finished, I set down the clipboard and looked at him. "Were you outside last night?" I asked. Morris stopped what he was doing. "What time?" "Around 1:50. "No, I was in my room." He studied my face. "Did you see someone?" "I saw someone walking the perimeter. They looked like you." Morris nodded slowly. "Did you acknowledge them?" "No." "Did you go outside?" "No." "Good. That's exactly right." He closed the hood on the snowmobile and wiped his hands on a rag. "You'll see that more often now. It's part of the pattern. You just keep following the rules. But if it wasn't you, it doesn't matter who it was. The rule still applies. You don't acknowledge them, you don't engage, you wait until morning and you ask me in person. You did everything right." He handed me the rag. "Clean up, then we'll do the perimeter walk." We walked the path in 24 minutes. The snow was deeper near the north side, where the drifts had piled up against the building. Morris pointed out a line of tracks elk, maybe bison, that crossed the boundary markers about 30 yards from the station. The tracks led toward the terraces and disappeared into the steam. "You see tracks like that, you note them, but you don't follow them," Morris said. "Animals move different in winter. They're not always what they seem." "What do you mean?" "I mean you follow the rules." He checked his watch. "We're done. I've got paperwork to finish. You've got the overnight again starting at 8. Next check at 11. I spent the afternoon in my room reading through the operations manual. I was on my second pass through the amendments when I noticed something I'd missed before. Rule 21 mentioned Morris specifically. If you see Morris outside between midnight and 5 and he waves or gestures, do not acknowledge him. But Rule 14 just said, do not acknowledge him, period. No mention of waving or gestures. The difference bothered me. It implied two different scenarios, one where Morris was just outside and one where he was trying to get my attention. The rules treated them differently, which meant the distinction mattered. I made a note in my log. Verify rules 14 and 21, understand the difference. At 8, I walked the perimeter. The sky was clear and the temperature had dropped to somewhere around 10 below. I finished in 23 minutes and locked the door behind me. At 11, I radioed Morris. "This is Harper, room 4, all clear." "Confirmed. Next check at 9 tomorrow morning." I sat at my desk and waited. The knocking came at 3:04. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more. I moved to the bed and lay down. The knocking continued for 4 minutes and then it stopped. At 4, I checked the hallway. Empty. 14 doors. In the morning, there was salt outside my door. More than usual, closer to a cup. I remembered Rule 16. If the amount is greater than 1 cup, radio the supervisor first. I pulled out the radio. "This is Harper, room 4. I have salt outside my door, approximately 1 cup, awaiting instructions." Morris responded within seconds. "Do not touch it, I'm coming to you." 2 minutes later, he was at my door. He looked at the salt, crouched down and studied the pattern. It wasn't scattered randomly, it formed a rough semicircle across the threshold with a small gap in the center. "This is new," Morris said quietly. He stood up and pulled a small notebook from his pocket. He sketched the pattern quickly, then looked at me. "Get the broom and dustpan from the equipment bay. Sweep this up and dispose of it outside. I'll wait here." I went to the bay, got the tools, and came back. Morris watched while I swept up the salt. When I was done, he followed me outside to the trash receptacle. I dumped the salt in, and he nodded. "Good. From now on, if you see a pattern like that, a semicircle, a line, anything deliberate, you radio me first. Understood?" "Understood. What does it mean?" Morris closed his notebook. It means someone's testing the boundaries. The rules hold, but we need to be more careful. He looked at the station, then back at me. I'm adding 2 more amendments today. You'll memorize them before your shift. Tonight. We went to the archive room. Morris unlocked the door, pulled out my binder, and clipped in a new sheet of paper. 2 rules numbered 22 and 23. 22. If you find salt arranged in a deliberate pattern outside your door, semicircle, line, triangle, or other recognizable shape, do not disturb it. Radio the supervisor immediately and wait for instructions. Do not step over the pattern. 23. If you see a ranger in uniform that you do not recognize and they speak to you first, respond only with "I'm on duty." Do not answer questions. Do not provide information about your schedule, your location, or the supervisor. End the conversation and return to the station immediately. I read the rules twice. Has this happened before? Yes, about 4 years ago during a hard winter. We had a ranger came in October, left in January. He didn't follow the rules as carefully as he should have. Things escalated. Morris closed the binder. He's not here anymore. What happened to him? He broke Rule 23, talked to someone he thought was a day ranger, told them where he'd be that night. He was found outside the boundary markers the next morning, hypothermia officially. But the tracks around him didn't match his boots and there was salt in his pockets. Morris locked the archive room behind us. That's why the rules get updated. We learn, we adapt, and we make sure the next person doesn't make the same mistakes. I spent the rest of the day memorizing the new rules. At 3, I did my radio check. At 8, I walked the perimeter in 22 minutes. The sky was overcast again and the wind was picking up from the north. At 11, I radioed Morris. This is Harper, room 4, all clear. Confirmed. I sat at my desk and opened my log. I was writing the date when the lights in my room flickered twice, then went out. I sat in the dark, listening. The radiator was still working. I could hear it clanking softly, but the overhead light and the desk lamp were both dead. I pulled my flashlight from my belt and clicked it on. The rules didn't say anything about the lights in my room going out. Only the equipment bay. I waited for a minute, then tried the light switch. Nothing. I grabbed the radio. This is Harper, room 4. My lights just went out. Radiator's still working, but no power to the lights. Requesting instructions. Morris responded immediately. Stay in your room. Use your flashlight. I'm checking the breaker. Stand by. 3 minutes later, the lights came back on. The radio crackled. Lights should be back. Confirm. Confirmed. Lights are on. It was a breaker. I reset it. If it happens again tonight, radio me immediately. Understood. The radio went silent. I turned off the flashlight and clipped it back to my belt. The room looked normal: desk, bed, window, radiator. But something felt wrong. I couldn't place it at first, and then I realized the air smelled different, faint, but distinct, like cold metal and old paper. I checked the window. It was closed and latched. I checked the door. Locked. I looked around the room trying to find the source of the smell, but it was already fading. I sat at my desk and waited for the knocking. It came at 2:28. 3 knocks, slow and deliberate. I moved to the bed and lay down. The knocking stopped after the 3rd knock. I waited until 4, then checked the hallway. Empty. 14 doors. But when I turned to go back to my room, I noticed something. The door at the far end of the hallway, the last one, number 14, was open about 2 inches. I could see darkness beyond it, and I could hear a faint sound, like wind or water moving through a pipe. I remembered Rule 3, do not enter the West Wing bathroom, and Rule 13, if you count a different number of doors, return to your room and radio the supervisor. I counted the doors again, slowly. 14, same as always. But the door was open. I walked back to my room, locked the door behind me, and pulled out the radio. "This is Harper, room 4. The last door in the West Wing hallway is open approximately 2 inches. I can hear sound coming from inside, requesting instructions." Morris responded immediately. "Do not approach the door. Do not enter the room. Stay in your room and lock the door. I'm coming to you." 2 minutes later, Morris knocked on my door, 2 knocks, quick and purposeful, not like the knocking at night. I opened the door. He was carrying a flashlight and a small leather pouch. "Show me," he said. I led him to the hallway. The door was still open. Morris walked up to it slowly, shining his flashlight through the gap. He stood there for a moment listening, and then he pulled the door closed and tested the latch. It clicked into place. "It's locked now," he said. "You did the right thing. You radioed me, you didn't approach, you followed the rule." He turned to face me. "From now on, if you see that door open, you don't investigate. You radio me, you lock your door, and you wait. Clear?" "Clear." Morris walked me back to my room. "Get some rest. Morning inventory at 7. He left, and I locked the door. I sat at my desk and listened to the building. Everything was quiet, the smell was gone. I didn't sleep. At 7, I met Morris in the equipment bay. I did the inventory while he checked the fuel levels. Everything was in order. We walked the perimeter in 21 minutes, and then Morris pulled me aside. "We need to talk about what happens next," he said. "We're coming up on mid-December. The 2 other rangers are supposed to arrive in a week, but one of them backed out yesterday. So it's going to be you, me, and one other person, a rookie named Dalton. He's never worked a winter season before. Is that a problem? It depends. Rookies make mistakes. They don't always follow the rules as carefully as they should. I'll be training him during the day, but you'll be on the overnight shifts with him. You'll need to keep an eye on him, make sure he's doing things right. If he breaks a rule, you report it to me immediately. Understood?" "Understood." Morris looked out at the terraces. The steam was rising in thick columns, and a bison was standing near the lower pools, motionless. "The park's getting more active, I can feel it. More knocking, more footsteps, doors opening, salt patterns. It happens every winter, but this year feels different, heavier." He turned back to me. "You've been doing good work. I need you to keep it up, especially once Dalton gets here." "I will." "Good. Now finish your log and get some rest. You've got the overnight again tonight." I spent the afternoon in my room, updating my log and reviewing the rules. At 3, I did my radio check. At 8, I walked the perimeter. The temperature had dropped again, and the wind was sharp enough to cut through my parka. I finished in 23 minutes and locked the door behind me. At 11, I radioed Morris. "This is Harper. Room 4, all clear." "Confirmed." I sat at my desk and waited. The knocking came at 3:12. 3 knocks, a pause, then silence. I moved to the bed and waited. The knocking didn't resume. At 4, I checked the hallway. Empty. 14 doors. The door at the end was closed and latched. In the morning, there was no salt. Dalton arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in mid-December. He was 24, tall and thin, with a nervous energy that made him talk too much. Morris met him in the parking lot and brought him inside. I was in the break room when they came in. "Harper, this is Dalton," Morris said. "Dalton, this is Harper. She's been here since late November, so she knows the routine. You'll shadow her for the first few days, learn the procedures, and then you'll take the overnight shifts together." Dalton shook my hand. "Good to meet you. Morris says you're solid." "Just follow the rules," I said. Morris walked Dalton through the building, showed him his room, the bathrooms, the equipment bay, the archive room. I heard them in the hallway, Morris's voice flat and patient, Dalton asking questions, too many questions. At 6, Morris brought Dalton to the break room. "Harper's going to walk you through the evening routine, perimeter walk at 8, radio check at 11. Tomorrow morning you'll do the inventory with me. After that, we'll go over the rules." Dalton nodded. Sounds good. Morris left and I poured myself a cup of coffee. Dalton sat across from me, drumming his fingers on the table. So how long have you been doing this? He asked. About 3 weeks. And it's just perimeter walks and inventory checks? And following the rules? Right. Morris mentioned those. He said there's a manual. There is. You'll read it tomorrow. Tonight, just follow me and do what I do. At 8, I led Dalton outside. The snow was deep and the wind was brutal. I walked the path at my usual pace, staying inside the markers. Dalton followed close behind, breathing hard from the altitude. Why do we stay inside the markers? He asked. Because that's the rule. But why? Because that's the rule. We finished the walk in 24 minutes. I locked the door behind us and led Dalton back to the break room. At 11, you'll do a radio check from your room, I said. Channel 6. State your name, your location, and all clear if there are no issues. Morris will confirm. That's it. What if there are issues? Then you report them. But you'll learn what counts as an issue tomorrow when you read the manual. Dalton looked at me. You're not much of a talker, are you? I'm here to do a job, so are you. He nodded slowly. Fair enough. At 11, I heard Dalton's voice on the radio from his room, nervous, too fast. This is Dalton, room 6, all clear, Morris confirmed. Then my turn. This is Harper, room 4, all clear. Confirmed. Next check at 9 tomorrow morning. I sat at my desk and waited for the knocking. It came at 2:57. 3 knocks, a pause, then silence. I moved to the bed and waited. At 4, I checked the hallway. Empty. 14 doors. In the morning, Morris met me in the equipment bay. How's Dalton? Nervous, asks too many questions. That's normal. He'll settle down once he understands the rules. Morris handed me the clipboard. Do the inventory. I'm taking Dalton through the manual this morning. You're off until the evening perimeter walk. I did the inventory. Everything was in order. I logged the counts and went back to my room. I could hear Morris and Dalton in the archive room. Morris's voice steady and clinical, explaining the rules one by one. At 3, I did my radio check. At 8, I walked the perimeter with Dalton. He was quieter this time, more focused. We finished in 22 minutes. At 11, we both radioed Morris, all clear. I sat at my desk and waited. The knocking came at 3:08. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more. I moved to the bed and waited. The knocking continued for 5 minutes, then stopped. At 4, I checked the hallway. Empty. 14 doors. On the 3rd night, Dalton made his first mistake. I was at my desk just after midnight when I heard his door open. I heard footsteps in the hallway moving toward the stairwell. I grabbed the radio. Dalton, this is Harper. What are you doing? No response. I opened my door and looked out. Dalton was halfway down the hallway, walking toward the stairwell. He was wearing his parka and boots. Dalton, stop! He turned around. I'm just going to the bathroom. Use the one on the 2nd floor, room 203. The one in the basement is closer. You can't use that one, it's in the rules. Dalton frowned. Morris didn't say anything about that. Rule 3. You don't use the basement bathroom or the west wing bathroom between 2 and 4 in the morning. You use the 2nd floor bathroom only. It's not 2 yet, it's 12:30. I checked my watch. He was right. The rule says between 2 and 4. But you should still use the 2nd floor bathroom, it's safer. Safer how? Just trust me. Use the 2nd floor bathroom. Dalton hesitated, then nodded. Fine. He walked past me toward the stairwell. I watched him go up to the 2nd floor, and then I went back to my room. I radioed Morris. This is Harper. Dalton just left his room to use the bathroom. He wanted to use the basement bathroom, but I told him to use the 2nd floor one. He complied. Morris responded immediately. Good. I'll talk to him in the morning. Make sure he understands the bathroom rule applies at all times, not just between 2 and 4. Understood. I sat at my desk and waited. 15 minutes later, I heard Dalton's door close. The hallway went quiet. The knocking came at 3:21. 3 knocks, slow and deliberate. I moved to the bed and waited. The knocking stopped after the 3rd knock. At 4, I checked the hallway. Empty. 14 doors. In the morning, Morris called Dalton into the archive room. I heard their voices through the door, Morris calm, Dalton defensive. When they came out, Dalton looked pale. Harper was right, Morris said. The bathroom rule applies at all times. You use the 2nd floor bathroom, period, no exceptions. Understood? Understood, Dalton said quietly. Morris looked at me. Good catch. Keep an eye on him. Dalton avoided me for the rest of the day. At 8, we walked the perimeter in silence. At 11, we radioed Morris. All clear. I sat at my desk and waited. The knocking came at 2:43. 3 knocks, a pause, then silence. At 4, I checked the hallway. Empty. 14 doors. On the 7th night, Dalton made his 2nd mistake. It was just after 10. I was in my room reading through the operations manual when I heard shouting in the hallway. Dalton's voice, loud and angry. Hey, who are you? This is a restricted area. I grabbed the radio and ran to the hallway. Dalton was at the far end near the last door, facing someone I couldn't see clearly. They were wearing a ranger uniform, dark green jacket, badge on the chest. Dalton, stop! I shouted. He turned to look at me. There's someone here. They're not supposed to be here. I looked at the person in the uniform. They were standing motionless, hands at their sides. I couldn't see their face clearly in the dim light, but something about their posture was wrong. Too stiff. Too still. I remembered Rule 11. If you see a ranger in uniform that you do not recognize, greet them politely but do not engage in conversation. And Rule 23. If they speak to you first, respond only with "I'm on duty." Dalton, step back, I said. Don't engage. But there, step back, now. Dalton hesitated, then walked backward toward me. The person in the uniform didn't move. They just stood there, watching. I pulled Dalton past me and radioed Morris. This is Harper. We have a visual on an unrecognized ranger in uniform, West Wing hallway, near the last door. Dalton engaged verbally. I'm pulling him back, requesting immediate assistance. Morris responded within seconds. Lock yourselves in Harper's room. Do not leave until I give the all clear. I pushed Dalton into my room and locked the door behind us. We stood in silence, listening. I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate, moving toward the stairwell. Then nothing. 5 minutes later, Morris knocked on my door. 2 quick knocks. I opened it. He was alone. They're gone, he said. He looked at Dalton. What did you say to them? I just asked who they were. I told them this was a restricted area. Morris's jaw tightened. Did they respond? No, they just stood there. Morris looked at me. Did you see them clearly? No. Too dark, but their posture was wrong. Morris nodded. They're gone now, but we need to add a protocol. He pulled out his notebook and wrote quickly. From now on, if either of you see an unrecognized ranger in uniform, you do not engage. You do not ask questions. You greet them politely, you end the interaction, and you radio me immediately. If they speak to you first, you respond with, I'm on duty and nothing else. Clear? Clear, I said. Dalton nodded, pale. Morris looked at him. You broke the rule. You engaged when you shouldn't have. That's a serious mistake. You're lucky Harper was there to pull you back. He closed his notebook. I'm putting you on day shifts only until you can demonstrate that you understand the rules. Harper will handle the overnights alone. But no arguments. This isn't a negotiation. You broke the rule and there are consequences. Morris turned to me. You've got the overnight. I'll check in at 11. He left. Dalton stood in my room staring at the floor. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "You should have read the manual more carefully." "I did read it. Then you should have followed it." I opened the door. "Go back to your room. Lock the door. Don't leave until morning." Dalton left without another word. I locked the door behind him and sat at my desk. I updated my log, unrecognized ranger, West Wing hallway. Dalton engaged verbally, situation contained, and then I waited. The knocking came at 3:34. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more, then 3 more. It continued for 8 minutes. I moved to the bed and lay down, facing the wall. The knocking stopped. At 4, I checked the hallway. Empty. 14 doors. In the morning, there was salt outside my door. A lot of it, maybe 2 cups, arranged in a deliberate semicircle across the threshold. I radioed Morris immediately. "This is Harper, room 4. I have salt outside my door, approximately 2 cups arranged in a semicircle. Awaiting instructions." Morris arrived within minutes. He looked at the pattern, sketched it in his notebook, and then nodded. "This is escalating," he said quietly. "Someone's pushing harder, testing the boundaries." He looked at me. "You're doing everything right. Keep following the rules, keep logging everything, and keep Dalton away from the overnight shifts until I say otherwise." "Understood." Morris supervised while I swept up the salt and disposed of it outside. When I came back, he handed me a new sheet of paper. 3 more amendments," he said. "Memorize them by tonight." I took the paper to the archive room and read it carefully. 24. If you see an unrecognized ranger in uniform after dark and they are standing motionless for more than 30 seconds, do not approach. Do not speak. Return to your room immediately and radio the supervisor. 25. If you hear knocking on your door that lasts longer than 10 minutes, move to the far corner of your room away from the door and window. Remain there until the knocking stops. Do not respond. Do not investigate. 26. If you find salt outside your door arranged in a complete circle, do not step inside the circle. Radio the supervisor immediately and wait outside your room until the supervisor arrives. I copied the amendments into my binder and spent the rest of the day memorizing them. At 3, I did my radio check. At 8, I walked the perimeter alone. Dalton stayed inside. At 11, I radioed Morris. "This is Harper, room 4, all clear." "Confirmed." I sat at my desk and waited. The knocking came at 2:59. 3 knocks, a pause, then silence. At 4, I checked the hallway. Empty. 14 doors. The pattern continued. Perimeter walks, inventory checks, radio calls. Knocking most nights, salt some mornings. Dalton stayed on day shifts, helping Morris with maintenance and paperwork. I handled the overnights alone. On the night of December 23rd, everything changed. I was at my desk just after 11 when the power went out. Not just my room, the entire building. The overhead lights, the desk lamp, the radiator. Everything went dark and silent. I could hear the wind outside howling through the eaves, but inside the station there was nothing. I pulled my flashlight from my belt and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating my desk, the bed, the window. I grabbed the radio. "This is Harper, room 4, power's out, building wide, I think, radiators stopped. Requesting instructions." Static, no response. I tried again. "Morris, this is Harper, power's out. Do you copy?" More static, then Morris's voice, faint and broken. "Copy, stay in room, I'm checking breaker, stand." The radio went dead. I sat in the dark, listening. The wind was getting louder, and I could hear something else, a low, rhythmic sound like footsteps on gravel. It was coming from outside, circling the building. I moved to the window and looked out. The moon was up and the snow was glowing in the pale light. I could see footprints, fresh ones, deep in the snow, forming a circle around the station. They were spaced evenly. perfectly measured, and they didn't cross the boundary markers. The footsteps continued for 5 minutes, and then they stopped. The radio crackled. "Harper, you there?" "I'm here. Power's still out." "No, generator's not responding. I'm going equipment bay manually. Stay your room, lock door. Don't leave any reason." "Understood?" The radio went silent. I locked the door and sat on the bed, shining my flashlight toward the window. The footprints were still visible in the snow, forming a perfect circle around the station. 10 minutes later, the power came back on. The overhead light flickered, the desk lamp glowed, and the radiator started clanking. The radio crackled. "Harper, power's back. Generator's running. You all right?" "I'm fine. I saw footprints outside, a circle around the station." There was a pause. "Don't go outside. I'll check it in the morning. Stay in your room until your shift starts at 7. "Understood." I sat at my desk and waited for the knocking. It came at 3:06. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more, then 3 more. It continued for 12 minutes. I moved to the far corner of the room, away from the door and window, and waited. The knocking stopped. At 4, I checked the hallway. Empty. 14 doors. In the morning, Morris met me in the equipment bay. He looked exhausted, his eyes red-rimmed and bloodshot. "Generator's fine," he said. "Something tripped the main breaker. I reset it, but it shouldn't have happened. The system's designed to handle winter loads." He handed me the clipboard. "Do the inventory. I'll check the footprints outside." I did the inventory while Morris went outside. 20 minutes later, he came back. His face was pale. "The footprints form a complete circle," he said quietly. 52 steps, perfectly spaced. They start and end at the same point, and they don't cross the boundary markers. He pulled out his notebook. "This is new. I've never seen it this precise before." "What does it mean?" "It means we're in a siege." Morris closed his notebook. "I'm implementing the emergency protocols. Starting tonight, you'll follow a different set of rules. They're more restrictive, more exhausting, but they'll keep you safe." "Understood?" "Understood." Morris led me to the archive room and pulled out a red binder I hadn't seen before. He opened it to the first page. The heading read, "Emergency Protocols for Siege Conditions." "These rules only apply when we're under siege," Morris said. "And we're under siege when we see a complete circle of footprints, or when the power fails twice in one night, or when the knocking lasts longer than 15 minutes. Any of those conditions trigger the emergency protocols." He tapped the page. "Read these now. Memorize them. You'll start following them tonight." I read the list. There were 5 rules numbered sequentially starting from 27. 27. During siege conditions, perimeter walks will be conducted every 4 hours. At 8 in the evening, midnight, 4 in the morning, and 8 in the morning. Each walk must be completed in 15 minutes or less. Do not deviate from the path. Do not stop for any reason. 28. During siege conditions, radio checks will occur every 2 hours at 9 in the evening, 11 at night, 1 in the morning, 3 in the morning, 5 in the morning, and 7 in the morning. Use channel 6 only. If the supervisor does not respond within 30 seconds, repeat the call. If there is no response after 3 attempts, remain in your room until morning. 29. During siege conditions, if you hear knocking on your door, do not respond. Move to the far corner of your room, away from the door and window, and remain there until the knocking stops. Do not count the knocks. Do not time them. Just wait. 30. During siege conditions, if you see someone outside the boundary markers, do not acknowledge them. Do not radio the supervisor unless they cross the markers. If they cross the markers, radio immediately and lock yourself in your room. 31. During siege conditions, do not enter the archive room, the basement bathroom, or the west wing bathroom at any time. Use the second-floor bathroom only. If the second-floor bathroom is inaccessible, use a container in your room. I read the rules 3 times, then looked at Morris. How long do the emergency protocols last? Until the siege conditions end. Usually 3 to 5 days, sometimes longer. He closed the binder. You'll be exhausted. You'll want to skip a perimeter walk or delay a radio check or take a shortcut. Don't. The emergency protocols are stricter for a reason. You follow them exactly every time and you'll make it through. What if I don't? Morris looked at me for a long moment. Then you'll end up like the ranger 4 years ago. He left me in the archive room. I copied the emergency protocols into my binder and spent the rest of the day memorizing them. At 3, I did my radio check, the first one under the new schedule. Morris confirmed. At 8, I walked the perimeter. The circle of footprints was still visible in the snow, though the wind had started to fill them in. I stayed inside the markers, kept my pace steady, and finished in 14 minutes. At 9, I radioed Morris. This is Harper, room 4, all clear. Confirmed, next check at 11. At 11, I radioed again. All clear. At midnight, I walked the perimeter. The wind was brutal and the temperature had dropped below 0. I finished in 15 minutes exactly. At 1 in the morning, I radioed Morris, all clear. At 3, I radioed Morris, all clear. The knocking started at 3:37. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more, then 3 more. It didn't stop. I moved to the far corner of my room, away from the door and window, and waited. The knocking continued, relentless and rhythmic. I didn't count. I didn't time it. I just sat in the corner, my flashlight off, and listened. The knocking stopped at 4:21. I waited 5 more minutes, then checked the hallway. Empty. 14 doors. At 4, I walked the perimeter. The footprints had been refilled by the wind, but I could still see the outline of the circle. I finished in 14 minutes. At 5, I radioed Morris, all clear. At 7, I radioed Morris, all clear. At 8, I walked the perimeter with Morris. He looked at the footprints, now barely visible, and nodded. "One night down," he said. "We'll keep the emergency protocols in place until the circle's completely gone. Retry M continue, and we've had 2 consecutive nights without extended knocking. That's how we know the siege is lifting." "How long does that usually take?" 3 to 5 days, sometimes a week. He checked his watch. "Do the inventory, then get some rest. You've got another long night ahead." I did the inventory. Everything was in order, though the salt supply was down to 3 bags. I logged it and went back to my room. I tried to sleep, but my body wouldn't let me. Every sound in the building, the radiator clanking, the wind rattling the windows, footsteps from the floor above, pulled me back to alertness. At noon, I gave up and made coffee in the break room. Dalton was there reading a paperback. He looked up when I came in. "Morris told me about the siege protocols," he said. "I'm sorry you have to handle it alone." "It's fine. If you need help." "I don't. Just stay on day shifts and follow the rules." He nodded and went back to his book. I drank my coffee in silence and returned to my room. At 3, I radioed Morris, all clear. At 8, I walked the perimeter. The footprints were almost gone, filled in by fresh snow, but I could still see faint depressions forming the circle. I finished in 13 minutes. At 9, I radioed Morris, all clear. At 11, I radioed Morris, all clear. At midnight, I walked the perimeter. The wind had died down and the sky was clear, stars everywhere. I finished in 14 minutes and locked the door behind me. At 1, I radioed Morris, all clear. At 3, I radioed Morris, all clear. The knocking started at 3:52. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more. It continued without stopping. I moved to the far corner of my room and waited. The knocking went on for 31 minutes. I didn't count, but I couldn't help marking the time in my head. It stopped at 4:23. At 4, I walked the perimeter. The footprints were gone, erased by the wind and fresh snow. I finished in 15 minutes. At 5, I radioed Morris, all clear. At 7, I radioed Morris, all clear. At 8, Morris met me in the equipment bay. Footprints? Gone. Good. One more night. If the knocking stays under 20 minutes and there are no new footprints, we'll lift the emergency protocols tomorrow. I did the inventory. The salt was down to 2 bags. I logged it and went back to my room. I slept for 3 hours, dreamless and heavy. When I woke, it was almost 3 in the afternoon. I made coffee and sat at my desk, staring at the operations manual. The rules blurred together: core guidelines, amendments, emergency protocols. 21 days of procedures, rituals, boundaries. At 3, I radioed Morris, all clear. At 8, I walked the perimeter, no footprints. The snow was smooth and undisturbed. I finished in 14 minutes. At 9, I radioed Morris, all clear. At 11, I radioed Morris, all clear. At midnight, I walked the perimeter, still no footprints. I finished in 13 minutes. At 1, I radioed Morris, all clear. At 3, I radioed Morris, all clear. The knocking started at 3:41, 3 knocks, a pause, then silence. I stayed in bed and waited. The knocking didn't resume. At 4, I checked the hallway, empty, 14 doors. At 4, I walked the perimeter, no footprints, no circles, just smooth snow reflecting the moonlight. I finished in 14 minutes. At 5, I radioed Morris, all clear. At 7, I radioed Morris, all clear. At 8, Morris met me outside. We walked the perimeter together, checking for any sign of the footprints. Nothing. Just snow and wind and the distant hiss of the thermal features. "Siege is over," Morris said. "We'll go back to standard protocols tonight. 2 perimeter walks, 3 radio checks. You can sleep." I nodded. I was too tired to feel relieved. "You did good," Morris said. "Better than most. You followed every rule, every protocol without hesitation. That's rare." He looked at the terraces. "The park respects that. It'll leave you alone for a while." "How long?" "Hard to say. A week, maybe 2. But it'll come back eventually. It always does." We went inside. I did the inventory, logged the counts, and went back to my room. I slept for 11 hours straight. When I woke, it was late afternoon on Christmas Eve. The station was quiet. Morris had given Dalton the day off, and the maintenance crew wasn't scheduled until after New Year's. It was just me and Morris. I made coffee and found Morris in the break room. He was writing in a notebook, logging something in his careful, precise handwriting. "Merry Christmas," he said without looking up. "Merry Christmas." He finished writing and closed the notebook. "You've been here almost a month. How are you holding up?" "I'm fine." "You look tired." "I am tired." Morris poured himself a cup of coffee. "That's normal. Winter duty wears on you. The isolation, the cold, the rules. Most people don't make it past 6 weeks. They either quit or they break a rule or they just stop caring, but you're still here and you're still sharp. That matters." "Why do you do it?" I asked. "You've been here for years. You could transfer, work summers, avoid all this." Morris was quiet for a moment. "Someone has to. The park doesn't stop in winter. The things that move out there, they don't take a break. If we're not here, following the rules, keeping the boundaries, they'd spread. Maybe not far, maybe just a few miles, but that's enough. That's how it starts." He looked at me. "You understand that now, don't you? The rules aren't arbitrary, they're containment." "Containment of what? Does it matter?" "You've seen enough to know it's real. You've heard the knocking, you've seen the footprints, you felt the weight of it. You can call it whatever you want: haunting, infestation, bleed through. The label doesn't change the procedures." He stood up and carried his cup to the sink. "Get some rest. Standard protocols resume tonight. Perimeter walk at 8. At 8, I walked the perimeter alone. The air was cold and still and the stars were out. I finished in 13 minutes. At 11, I radioed Morris, all clear. I sat at my desk and waited for the knocking. It came at 2:37. 3 knocks, a pause, then silence. I moved to the bed and waited. At 4, I checked the hallway. Empty. 14 doors. In the morning, there was no salt. The days between Christmas and New Year's passed in a steady rhythm. Perimeter walks, inventory checks, radio calls. The knocking came most nights, always brief, always stopping after the third knock. No footprints, no salt patterns, no unrecognized rangers. Dalton came back on the 27th. Morris kept him on day shifts, but he seemed steadier now, more focused. He stopped asking questions and started following the procedures without complaint. On New Year's Eve, Morris called us both into the archive room. "We're coming up on the coldest part of winter," he said, "January and February. The park gets more active during these months. More knocking, more footsteps, more anomalies. The rules will hold, but you need to stay sharp. Don't get complacent. Don't assume that because you've made it this far, you're safe. Understood?" "Understood," I said. Dalton nodded. Morris pulled out 2 sheets of paper and handed one to each of us. 2 more amendments. Memorize them by tomorrow. I read the sheet. 32. If you hear your name called from inside the station during the day, verify the speaker before responding. Look for visual confirmation. If you cannot see the speaker, do not respond. Radio the supervisor. 33. If you see steam or fog inside the station, do not walk through it. Note the location and radio the supervisor immediately. Wait for instructions before proceeding. I copied the amendments into my binder and spent the evening memorizing them. At 8, I walked the perimeter with Dalton. He was quiet, focused, keeping pace. We finished in 14 minutes. At 11, I radioed Morris from my room. Dalton radioed from his. Both all clear. I sat at my desk and waited. The knocking came at 3:14. 3 knocks, a pause, then silence. At 4, I checked the hallway. Empty. 14 doors. In the morning, there was salt outside my door. Just a small amount, scattered randomly. I swept it up and disposed of it outside. The pattern continued into January, cold, clear days. Long, silent nights. The knocking came most nights, sometimes brief, sometimes extended. I followed the rules. I stayed sharp. On January 7th, I heard my name. It was just after 2 in the afternoon. I was in the equipment bay checking the fuel levels when I heard a voice from the hallway. "Harper." It was Morris's voice, flat, familiar. I set down the fuel can and walked to the doorway. The hallway was empty. "Morris," I called. No response. I remembered Rule 32. Verify the speaker before responding. Look for visual confirmation. I pulled out the radio. "Morris, this is Harper. Did you just call my name?" There was a pause. Then Morris's voice, slightly distorted by static. "No. Where are you?" "Equipment bay. I heard someone call my name from the hallway. Sounded like you." "Stay where you are. I'm coming to you." 2 minutes later, Morris appeared at the doorway. He was carrying his radio and a flashlight. He checked the hallway, shining his light into the corners, and then he came into the bay. "You did the right thing," he said. "You verified before responding. That's critical." He looked around the bay. "Anything else unusual?" "No. Just the voice." Morris nodded. "It'll happen more often now. You'll hear voices mine, Dalton's, people you know from before you came here. They'll sound right, they'll use your name, they'll try to get you to respond. You follow the rule, you verify visually, or you radio me. You don't trust the voice alone. What happens if I respond? Depends. Sometimes nothing. Sometimes you end up following the voice and it leads you somewhere you shouldn't be. Outside the markers, into the basement, down a hallway that doesn't exist. He clipped his radio back to his belt. "Just follow the rule. You'll be fine." He left and I finished checking the fuel. Everything was in order. I logged the counts and went back to my room. At 3, I did my radio check. At 8, Dalton and I walked the perimeter. The wind was brutal and the temperature was somewhere around 20 below. We finished in 16 minutes. At 11, we radioed Morris. Both all clear. I sat at my desk and waited. The knocking came at 2:49. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more, then 3 more. It continued for 7 minutes. I moved to the bed and waited. The knocking stopped. At 4, I checked the hallway. Empty. 14 doors. On January 12th, Dalton broke another rule. It was just after midnight. I was in my room updating my log when I heard shouting from the hallway. I grabbed the radio and ran outside. Dalton was at the stairwell looking down toward the basement. "Harper, come here. There's someone down there." I ran to the stairwell and looked down. The basement was dark, but I could see a faint light moving back and forth like someone carrying a flashlight. "Dalton, step back," I said. "But someone's down there. We need to check it out." "No, we don't go to the basement. It's not part of the perimeter." "But what if it's an intruder?" I grabbed his arm and pulled him away from the stairwell. "It doesn't matter. We radio Morris, we lock ourselves in our rooms, and we wait for instructions. That's the procedure." I pulled out the radio. "Morris, this is Harper. We have a visual on movement in the basement. Light source, possibly flashlight. Dalton and I are returning to our rooms, requesting instructions." Morris responded immediately. "Lock yourselves in your rooms. Do not investigate. I'll handle it. Confirm." "Confirmed." I pushed Dalton toward his room. "Lock your door. Don't leave until Morris gives the all clear. But no arguments. Lock your door." Dalton went into his room. I heard the lock click. I went back to my room and locked my door. 10 minutes later, Morris radioed. "All clear. The basement's secure. No intruders. You can resume normal activity." I unlocked my door and checked the hallway. Morris was at the stairwell, shining his flashlight down into the basement. He looked up when he saw me. "Anything down there?" I asked. "No." But there were footprints, fresh ones in the dust. They went from the stairs to the far wall and then they stopped. No return prints. He turned off his flashlight. "It's testing the boundaries again. Seeing who follows the rules and who doesn't." "Dalton almost went down there, didn't he?" "Yes, I stopped him." Morris nodded. "Good. He's still a liability. I'm keeping him on day shifts for the rest of the season." He looked at me. "You're steady. You've been tested more than most and you haven't cracked. That's rare. I'm promoting you to lead Winter Ranger, effective immediately. From now on, you handle the overnights. You make the calls and you report directly to me. Dalton assists with day shifts only." "Understood." "Good. Get some rest. You've earned it." I went back to my room and sat at my desk. Led Winter Ranger. The title didn't mean much in practical terms, same duties, same rules, same procedures, but it meant Morris trusted me. It meant I'd proven myself. I updated my log and waited for the knocking. It came at 3:07. 3 knocks, a pause, then silence. At 4, I checked the hallway. Empty. 14 doors. The rest of January passed without major incidents. Knocking most nights, occasional salt in the mornings, one sighting of an unrecognized ranger at a distance. I followed the rules. I stayed sharp. Dalton kept to his day shifts and stopped making mistakes. On February 3rd, Morris called me into the archive room. "We're coming up on the end of the season," he said. "You've been here almost 10 weeks. That's longer than most. You've handled everything the park's thrown at you, and you've done it by the book. I'm impressed." He pulled out a folder. "I'm offering you a permanent position. Lead Winter Ranger. Every season you'd come back in October, work through March, and have the rest of the year off. The pay's double what you made this year, plus hazard bonuses." I looked at the folder. "What about Dalton?" "He's not coming back. He's competent, but he's not reliable. He breaks rules, he asks too many questions, he second-guesses the procedures. I need someone who follows the system without hesitation. That's you." "Do I have to decide now?" "No. Think about it. Let me know by the end of February." He handed me the folder. "In the meantime, we've got 6 more weeks. Keep doing what you're doing." I took the folder back to my room and read through it. The contract was straightforward: 6 months on, 6 months off, salary and benefits. I set it aside and stared out the window. 10 weeks of knocking, footsteps, salt, rules. 10 weeks of vigilance, exhaustion, isolation. I should have hated it. I should have wanted to leave as soon as the roads opened. But I didn't. The rules made sense. The procedures worked. The boundaries held. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was doing something that mattered. I put the folder in my desk drawer and went to do the inventory. The rest of February passed in the usual rhythm. Perimeter walks, radio checks, inventory logs. The knocking came most nights. The salt appeared most mornings. I followed the rules. On February 28th, I signed the contract and gave it to Morris. "Good," he said. "I'll process it this week. You'll start again in October." He looked at me. "One more week and then the road's open. The season's almost over." On March 5th, the last night of the season, the knocking lasted for 43 minutes. It started at 2:57. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more, then 3 more. It didn't stop. I moved to the far corner of my room and waited, my flashlight off, listening to the rhythm. The knocking was steady, patient, relentless. It stopped at 3:40. I waited 5 minutes, then checked the hallway. Empty. 14 doors. In the morning, there was no salt. Morris met me in the equipment bay at 7. "Last inventory of the season," he said. "Make it count." I did the inventory. Everything was in order. 2 snowmobiles, 3 gallons of gas per can, 12 flares per box. I logged the counts and handed the clipboard to Morris. "Good work," he said. "The trucks will be here this afternoon to take the equipment back to storage. You and Dalton can head out whenever you're ready. Roads are clear. What about you?" "I'll stay another week, close things down, prep for next season." He handed me a key. "This is for the archive room. When you come back in October, you'll need it. There's a new binder on the top shelf, updates, amendments, lessons learned. Read it before you start your shifts." I took the key. "Anything I should know?" Morris thought for a moment. "The park changes every year. New patterns, new tests, new gaps in the rules. You can't predict it. You just have to stay sharp, follow the system, and adapt when you need to. That's the job." He shook my hand. "I'll see you in October. Stay safe." I packed my bags, loaded my truck, and drove out of Mammoth Hot Springs just after noon. Dalton left an hour later, heading back to Bozeman. I watched the station shrink in my rearview mirror until it disappeared behind the trees. The roads were clear, the sky was blue, and the temperature was somewhere around 40. It felt like a different world. I drove to Bozeman, rented an apartment, and spent the next 6 months working at a grocery store, saving money, reading. I didn't talk about the winter. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen, what I'd heard, what I'd followed. The rules stayed in my head, precise and clear, waiting. In October, I drove back to Mammoth Hot Springs. Morris was waiting for me in the parking lot. He looked the same, tired, weathered, but steady. "Welcome back," he said. He handed me the key ring. 12 keys. I unlocked the archive room and found the new binder on the top shelf. I opened it to the first page. The heading read, "Amendments and Updates, Winter Season." There were 6 new rules, numbered 34 through 39. I read them slowly, carefully, committing each one to memory. When I finished, I closed the binder and looked at Morris. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready?" I carried the binder to my room, set it on the desk, and unpacked my bags. Everything was the same: the bed, the desk, the chair, the window facing north. The radiator clanked when I turned it on. At 7, I did the morning inventory. At 8, Morris and I walked the perimeter. 15 minutes, no deviations. At 11, I radioed Morris from my room. "This is Harper. Room 4, all clear." "Confirmed. Welcome back." I sat at my desk and opened the binder. I read through the rules, core guidelines, amendments, emergency protocols, updates. 39 rules now, tested and refined over years of winter duty. I turned to a blank page at the back of the binder and wrote the date. Below it I wrote, "Notes for the next lead winter ranger." I left the rest of the page blank. I'd fill it in over the next 6 months, logging the lessons I learned, the patterns I noticed, the gaps I found. And when my replacement came, if they came, they'd have what I had. A clear system, a tested set of procedures, and the knowledge that the rules existed for a reason. At 2:41 in the morning, the knocking started. 3 knocks, slow and deliberate. I stayed in bed and counted the seconds. The knocking stopped after the 3rd knock. At 4, I checked the hallway. Empty. 14 doors. In the morning, there was salt outside my door, just a small amount scattered randomly. I swept it up and disposed of it outside. I did the inventory, walked the perimeter, and logged the counts. The pattern continued.